happy for, and hard work are there. All good job. Proud of you.
Thanks so much, mate. Woo! What a great race, guys. Fantastic stuff, strategy. The car felt great today. I'm so grateful, so proud. Grazie a tutti. And for the tifosi, that also them.
And some pickup, please. Enjoy the in-lap and charge on. Enjoy the tifosi on the hills.
That's more like it, guys. That's more like it. Let's keep pushing. We get our qualifying better and we can race like that. And we will be winning.
Yes, indeed. Hard work always pays off.
Never give up.
Is it possible for a radio message to change everything? What Lewis Hamilton said after his best career with Ferrari could mark the true renaissance of the British. The Imola circuit in the Grand Prix of Emilia Romagna represented much more than a simple career in the calendar. It was the appointment at Ferrari's house, the temple where the memory of its past glories is venerated and where each error is magnified under the gaze of thousands of tifosi. For Hamilton, this added an extra emotional load, demonstrate that he could support the weight of the red legacy. However, the beginning of the weekend was a real disaster. During free training, mechanical problems reappeared, especially in the brake system, which caused one of the most tense moments when Hamilton exclaimed by radio that the car simply does not stop. The subsequent statements were even harder. The pilot made it clear that he had not come to Ferrari to fight for a 7th place. The atmosphere became even more bleak with the result of the classification. Neither Hamilton nor his partner Charles Leclerc managed to overcome Q2. They ended outside the top 10 on the output grid, in positions 12 and 11 respectively. A very hard blow to the Scuderia, who saw how his double bet at home evaporated even before starting the race. The pressure in the garage was palpable. The engineers worked under tension, the faces hardened, and the media already talked about crisis. In the midst of that chaos, Hamilton maintained a rigid countenance, but his body language revealed the disappointment of who expected the most. Critical voices began to sound stronger, questioning whether Heptacampion was really prepared to succeed with the rampant Cavallino. Everything seemed to indicate that the weekend would be another gray page at its newly started stage in Ferrari. The old ghosts of adaptation, the lack of harmony with the team, and a car that did not respond, combined to feed the failure narrative. Hamilton's red dream, until that moment, was nothing more than a series of chained disappointments. And in the meantime, the competition continued to progress. McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes showed signs of progress, while Ferrari was debated between strategic doubts and technical problems that seemed to have no immediate solution. In this context, Sunday was outlined as a unique opportunity, not only to redeem himself, but to change the course of a narrative that was being written with too much pessimistic ink. Sunday morning in Imola did not bring obvious signs of redemption for Lewis Hamilton. The expectations were moderate in the best case, and the emotional climate in the Ferrari garage was that of a tense calm, of those that precede both the disaster and the miracle. Few imagined what was to come. Because what happened that day in the Enzo e Dino Ferrari's Roma was much more than a clean career or a simple successful strategy. It was the awakening of a pilot who had been trapped between doubts for months, mismatches, and an internal struggle to meet again with its competitive essence. It was also the tangible manifestation that when a successful team and the pilot responds, the story can be rewritten in just 60 laps. From the first turn, it became clear that Hamilton felt different. The SF25, which until then had been a nervous and unpredictable car in his hands, finally returned some confidence. Setup modifications applied after free, along with a meticulous balance review and brake temperature strategy, took effect. Ferrari, aware that another strategic error could not afford before his audience, opted for a countercurrent strategy, prioritizing clean air and rhythm control instead of fighting directly in traffic. The British executed that strategy with surgical precision, managing the tires in the key moments and attacking when the circumstances were ideal. It was not a boast of pure aggressiveness, but a recital of experience, control, and tactical maturity. The comeback was progressive but firm. He surpassed cars with the best starting position, left behind his own partner Charles Leclerc, who had also had a solid race, and finally reached the 4th position, only behind 3 of the most competitive cars of the championship. The most remarkable thing was not only the result itself, but the context that surrounded it. Starting from the 12th place on the grill without boxes and boxes, without track errors, and with an impeccable mental management. Each overtaking, every clean return, each communication with its engineer Riccardo Adami evidenced a synchronization level that had simply not present in the previous great prizes. And that is where another silent victory was found, but just as valuable as the sum of points. Because in addition to technical performance, there was an emotional transformation. During the first races of the year, Hamilton had been critical of the team, with the car, and even his own performance. The radios were loaded with tension, frustration, and undercover reproaches. In Isola, on the other hand, that tension gave way to an unusual, almost methodical calm. There was no drama, only execution. And that was reflected not only in its piloting, but also in the behavior of the team itself. Adami, his engineer, who had been criticized for lack of rapport with Hamilton in races such as Miami or Japan, worked with serenity and precision throughout the race. Both pilot and engineer seemed to have found an effective communication channel, based on mutual respect and a shared reading of what was happening on the track. The emotional response of the public was also different. The Tifosi, initially silent and somewhat skeptical, began applauding every time the SF25 with number 44 won a position. Hamilton, who in other circumstances had been received with coldness from Maranello's most purists, began to harvest a genuine acceptance. It was a turning point, not because it guarantees an absolute change in the season, nor because I will erase the deficiencies that the Ferrari project still drags, but because he showed, with facts, that when Hamilton has a car that responds, he is still one of the best pilots in the grid. And because in an environment where each race is a constant test of faith and strategy, having found a weekend without errors, with perfect execution and solid result, can be the first brick of a much more ambitious construction. A construction that, if it continues on these foundations, could return to Hamilton and Ferrari at the top of the podium in the near future. The most powerful moment of the whole weekend in Imola was not lived on the track, or in the press room, even on the podium, which this time was out of reach for Ferrari. It was lived on the radio of the team, seconds after Lewis Hamilton crossed the finish line in 4th position. That transmission, loaded with sincerity and emotion contained, was much more than a simple congratulation after a good career. It was a revival statement. What a great career, guys, fantastic strategy, stops. The car has felt great today, I am very grateful, very proud. That is more similar, guys, that is more similar. Let's continue pressing, we improve in classification and we will be winning. That final phrase was not accidental or decorative. It was the reflection of a pilot who finally felt that there was something real to build. The radio in Formula One has evolved to become a direct window to the pilot's psychology. In that channel, without filters or scripts, emotions are revealed that are often not expressed in front of the cameras. In the case of Hamilton, this communication was revealing for his contrast to the messages he had transmitted in the previous great awards. In Miami, for example, his tone was rough, frustrated, almost resigned. Complaints about the car, strategy, and communication with their engineer Riccardo Adami showed a relationship even without consolidating, loaded with tension and misunderstandings. But in Isola, everything changed. Hamilton's voice sounded firm, clear, relieved. Not only did I recognize the team's work, but I celebrated it. That not pretended gratitude was like a sign that, finally, the connection that everyone expected began to bloom. This transformation also left a mark within Ferrari's garage. The message not only excited engineers and mechanics, but served as a trusted catalyst. After weeks questioning their decisions, their methodology, and the relationship with a world champion who failed to integrate at all, that message was a public validation that they were on the right track. And it was not an empty message. It was specific, loaded with technical and emotional content. Hamilton did not talk about luck or external circumstances. He talked about strategy, execution, and improving classification as the next logical step towards victory. His approach was aligned with the needs of the team, and that, in an organization historically sensitive to internal noise, is vital. Riccardo Adami, who had been indicated by the lack of chemistry with Hamilton, also came out reinforced. The coordination during the race, the precision in the stops and boxes, and the tranquility in the communications were proof that both had found a common language. Hamilton explained it after the race with unusual clarity. I was calm, so he was calm, and the team was calm executing the strategy. That phrase condenses the core of what any successful team in Formula One needs: a collective mental state of synchronization and trust. It was not just a good execution. It was a sample of mutual maturity that, if it is maintained, can change the course of the season. The impact also transcended the technical. In terms of narrative, Hamilton achieved what no official statement, nor anterior victory in another team, could have achieved: conquer the heart of the tifosi. That fraction of the second in which he expressed gratitude and hope resonated with a hobby that does not easily forgive, but that knows how to assess the commitment. For Ferrari fans, there is nothing more important than feeling that his pilot shares the passion for red colors, for history, for the symbol. And Hamilton, with that message, finally aligned with that emotionality. He went from being the external champion to be, at least for a moment, one of his. What happened in that radio communication should not be underestimated. In a sport where every tenth matters, so do the words, because they can consolidate relationships, restructure internal hierarchies, and feed the morale of a whole team. That message was the clearest sign that the Hamilton-Ferrari project can still fulfill its promise. And although a fourth place does not translate into titles, it can mark the beginning of the cycle change. From that moment, it is no longer just about adjusting the car or understanding the strategy. Now there is also an intangible factor at stake: mutual faith, the conviction that, together, they can win. And when that happens, the story is always willing to rewrite. Emilia Romagna 2025 was not a race won by Lewis Hamilton or Ferrari in terms of points or trophies. There was no celebration on the podium, no hymn sounding in honor of Maranello. And yet, for those who understand Formula One beyond the stopwatch, this weekend represented one of the most significant victories so far this season. Because it was the confirmation that, despite the initial stumbling, broken expectations, and external noise, something deep changed inside Ferrari and, above all, within Hamilton himself. This fourth place cannot be measured solely by the final position in the table. You have to measure it in context, against a car that was not the fastest, starting from an adverse position on the grille, facing monumental pressure on the most symbolic track of the calendar for Ferrari, and after weeks of discouraging results. This result represents an emotional, technical, and symbolic inflection. And that has immense value. Because in a championship where every small detail can tip the balance, have gained trust, connection with the equipment, and the validation of the environment, can mark the beginning of an ascending spiral difficult to stop. Hamilton, during this weekend, recovered something that seemed to have diluted since his last years in Mercedes: absolute emotional control in the race. When the pilot finds that serenity and mastery of his environment, his decisions are more precise, his most consistent times, and his smartest movements. It is a state so that it is not achieved only with training, but requires total rapport between mind, car, and equipment. And that was precisely what we saw in Imola. A pilot who not only knew what he was doing, but felt every millimeter of the layout as an extension of his intuition. That type of connection does not happen every day, and when it is presented, you can change the dynamics of an entire championship. You also have to consider what this performance means internally for Ferrari. It is not just that a pilot has made a good career. It is about the most demanding and passionate team in the world begins to see the first fruits of a bet that until now seemed not to take off. The engineers, the strategists, the mechanics, and the directors find on this type of weekends the emotional fuel to continue pushing. Formula One is a collective where sport and symbolic victories such as Hamilton and Imola are energy catalysts, motivation and focus within an organization that has often been lost due to lack of cohesion. Therefore, this result should not be interpreted as an exception. Rather, it should be understood as a possible starting point. The moment where the narrative of the disubicated pilot and the disoriented team can be transformed into the history of an alliance that, with mutual adjustments and learning, manages to become strong. And that is especially important when you think about what is left of the championship. The season is still long, with diverse circuits and complex strategic demands. If Ferrari manages to maintain the consistency in his decision-making, and if Hamilton maintains the mental clarity that he demonstrated in Imola, the goal of fighting for victories does not seem as distant as just a couple of weeks ago. Finally, we must not underestimate the external effect. The dynamics of power change the strategies of the rivals, and change the media approach. What was seen in Imola was just a spark. But in a sport where emotions are as volatile as the climate on the track, that spark can become a fire. And if that happens, what began as a transition season can end up being one of the most fascinating stories of redemption and glory that Formula One has told in years.